Hello YouTube, it's Matthew here and welcome to my next video. And in this video I'm going to be talking to all of you guys about Windows Forensic and the beginnings of that. So we'll be going over some steps about the process of doing that, as well as some of the artifacts that we may find on a Windows device. So if that seems interesting to any of you, please stick around and I'll roll the intro next. So welcome back to the video. So for this intro to Windows Forensics, I'm going to be going first over just the basics, and I believe in the next video, if I stick to what I'm going to say here, I'll go deeper into some of the concepts that I'll just shout out during the video. So without further ado, let's get into our intro to Windows Forensics. Now for this, the basics of digital forensics will be discussed in this presentation. And so today's goals are, again, to go over some of the basics that need to be known for forensics on a Windows system. And we're also going to talk about where forensics is most helpful. And this will kind of be in addition to one of my previous videos about the forensic process that I did a while back. So it'll amend that, but I think they mostly have the same facts here, but a little bit more explanation here in some cases. And now we'll also talk about what important hardware facts must be known to be an effective investigator on a Windows system. Now let's start off with some important facts about Windows. So if you're young like me, you'll remember only a few versions of Windows. Maybe some of you guys will remember Windows 95 or Windows Millennium Edition or ME, but I remember Windows XP because I was growing up right when Windows XP was a thing. And so I was around for XP, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 10, and Windows 11. And I think in many cases, all those 4 or 5 operating systems, depending on whether you count Windows 11 and Windows 10 the same thing, if you count both those the same thing, it'll be 4 operating systems, but 5 operating systems if Windows 10 and 11 are separate. Anyway, the most relevant ones today are probably Windows 7, 10, and 11, because I know some places that are like on the power grid or others that need older systems still use Windows 7, but most businesses, schools, and probably everywhere else use 10 and 11. And as a recording this in the second to last week of December of 2024, both Windows 10 and 11 are still supported. But I got a little bit ahead of myself over there when I talked about Windows from my point of view. So Windows from everyone's point of view, especially if you're an old head from the 70s or the 80s, you'll know that Windows 1.0 came out in 1985. And that was one of the first operating systems to have a window-based operating system, and that is a graphical user interface. That was much unlike the terminal interfaces of the previous systems. But when it comes to all of the things today, we take advantage in spades of that user interface system that uses the graphical based windows. And also Microsoft has developed it so much so that it is a unified platform with other Microsoft products like Windows tablets. I'm about to say Windows phones, but Windows phones is no longer a thing. The Microsoft Xbox and a whole bunch of other Microsoft products that you would find hard not to use together. And again, in Windows is found everywhere. So you probably are watching this on a Windows computer right now. If you're not, then you probably have a Mac or a Linux system. But Windows can also be found in as the office computer that you're using. Maybe you're watching this at an office or at your forensic workstation. Maybe you have external servers at your work, or you're connecting to external servers for some service somewhere outside in the world. Maybe you're working in a large enterprise and you have a server there that may run Windows Server. And Windows is probably also at hospitals, retail stores, schools, and a whole laundry list of other things. So it's safe to say that it's a very ubiquitous operating system, since it does have most of the market share compared to things like macOS, which I'm using to record this video, and Linux, which some of you guys may be using. Okay, so these are some of the situations where we will need forensics. So first of all, when it comes to data breaches, we might need forensics in order to, or we might be hired on as forensic investigators in a data breach when we want to, or when our clients want us to help them find out all the places that were harmed during this data breach, and thus helping them find ways to protect against that type of data breach in the future. And in a similar vein, their intelligence is also in some way forensics, because it deals with going through logs and finding all the areas that are weak on your system, and these weak areas will give us insights into how to better protect against threats in the future. And when it comes to solving crimes, people in law enforcement use forensics all the time. Not only computer forensics, but also real forensics. And this is to help identify whether or not a person is responsible for the crime, and if they are, it'll show us exactly how they did it and where they were when they did it and whatever. And also that is in alignment with crimes like fraud and embezzlement and other crimes that you may see outside. And in other civil cases like divorce cases and others, we'll also find forensics being used. And in the case of like a divorce case, for instance, having a forensic investigator may be really helpful, because we may want to prove that there was infidelity on either side of the relationship or anything along those sorts of lines. You can fill in whatever else in your case, but I will move on. So again, some evidence types that we may see on a Windows computer. Maybe, for instance, web activity through any browser like Edge, Firefox, Chrome, or any browser of your choice. Some email correspondence through either the mail app or through any browsers discussed above. Any documents that were printed or saved onto the computer, as well as documents that were not saved at all and that were logged or that were stored in temporary format, in temporary files, or the type of auto recovery files that you find after your computer shuts down wrongly and you have them open in things like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel or something like that. And along with those, we will find deleted files that were either just totally deleted or deleted data that was totally written over. And this data can be found, at least the data that was in parts of the drive that were written over. This can be found with special tools like Belkasoft X and Magnet Axiom that specifically check through things along the lines of, or which specifically check through all of the space and unallocated space too, to make sure that nothing is hidden there. And also, we can find reformatted hard drives and data partitions that were not data partitions that were removed. And we can also use forensics to help us find the time sequence of events, which is called time stamping or pattern of life analysis. Actually, we can use the time sequence of events to create a pattern of life analysis to show where this computer was and what it was doing, and if there were any habits that this computer user had when they were using this computer. And also we can find evidence linking removable disks to the computer that created them. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do with this, and there is also a forensic process that we have to follow when doing these things. So first of all, I've broken this down, this thing, or I've broken the full forensic process here down into 3 major steps, and some of them contain more steps than others. So in our first process, our data retrieval process, we will find it in the field or find it in our place where we were told to pick it up from. And then after we will take it to our lab and categorize it in that lab as a phone or as some type of data that we will then image later on. And in our first step of the data analysis process is to image the storage medium, which will involve taking it out of whatever computer was housing it. And after we do this, we're going to put that through an imaging software and create a bit by bit copy of the thing. And in doing so, we'll have a place, or we will have a full copy of the device's memory that will be used for data analysis. And that brings us directly into our next process, which is our data analysis process. So we will analyze this data by whatever means we have, and this analysis will also lead very very smoothly into a reporting process. And this data analysis process can use by hand imaging, or we can use a great number of tools that are available for us to make sense of this data, and making sense of this data will help us to include evidence in our report, and that report will eventually be presented in court to the judge, and it'll help us prove whether whether the person that we're on the defense of is innocent or guilty of the crime. And we'll go over chain of custody at some point, but know that chain of custody is a thing. Okay, now let's move on to the chain of custody. So the chain of custody is a critical process that ensures the integrity, authenticity, and admissibility of the digital evidence during our investigation. So there are many steps related to our chain of custody and the documentation behind that. So first of all, the first key step to this is the information or the evidence information identification and collection. So first of all, the initial identification is clearly identified, whether the evidence be hard drives, USB drives, emails, logs, or whatever have you. And then we label it with a unique identifier that will be associated with it and used throughout reporting and every other part of the process. And then after that, we label down the collection methods to how they were collected. So for instance, if we took a hard drive out of a computer, we'd say this hard drive was taken out of a computer. Whereas if we have a bitstream copy of our storage medium put on a flash drive somewhere, we'd mark it that way so that we can have it with us and we can have access to it. Now, again, I can't stress enough the documentation or the detailed records within the documentation that you have. And so this is used to maintain a comprehensive log of every step in handling the evidence for us, the examiners. And this will include things like timestamps, descriptions, actions, and even the names of the individuals involved. And this document will also include a chain of custody form, which will include dates, the persons who collected the evidence, the method that they collected the evidence with, and the condition of the evidence at the time of collection. And also the condition of it after the evidence was copied over. Now, there are also some contextual notes that we may need to take note of. And this will be something like recording locations, the contextual locations, the situation, and any observations about the evidence or its environment. A third set of steps are our preservation of this stuff. And this means maintaining the integrity. So in doing so, we have to protect the evidence from being tampered with, damaged, or being lost in any way, shape, or form. And also we need to store it in a secure environment with restricted access so that no one else that's not allowed to access it will access it. And if that wasn't enough, we have to also take hash values of our logical data so that we can compare it to the originals to verify that nothing has been changed on the bit by bit level. And there's also an aspect of transfer and handling of the information in the chain of custody. And this is controlled access that is meant to restrict evidence handling to only the authorized individuals that have been mentioned in the steps above. And document and transfers between people and places of storage will be documented, and they'll be documented in some form like who received the evidence, the purpose of the transfer, and the date and time of the transfer. And these transfers must take place in a secure manner. And also within chain of custody is analysis by the person who is allowed to analyze it. So again, with our reporting, we have that we have to analyze the data in specific forensic methods, and with these forensic methods, we have to note them down in our chain of custody and in our reporting as well. Also, audit trails to maintain logs of these analysis steps and the tools used and the findings for our eventual report. And once the report is done, we will be called to the court to present it. So this is our expert testimony, which you or me, the expert that did this forensic analysis, is required to describe what they did and what they found. And we need to make sure that we use tools and techniques that are admissible by court. And this means that if you do something necessarily new, you may not be able to show that in court because it hasn't been approved by the body of forensic analysts, and also other people that may be learning these or doing these forensic scientific processes. And after the court trial, after you do your expert testimony and everything is said and done, data is retained in a certain manner and disposed in a certain manner as well. And so for retention, we need to make sure that we retain it for a certain amount of time just in case it's needed in the future. But if it's not needed at any point in time, we need to dispose it in a certain manner that's very secure and that we will not be leaking any of the data. So in this case, we might need to take something like a degaussing method, which uses an electric field to disassemble all the bits within the drive, effectively making it useless, or making the data on it useless, I should say. And that's like a full reformat of the disk. And again, this chain of custody document is very important for us as forensic analysts, because it shows our legal validity. It allows us to avoid data contamination. It shows that we are accountable forensic analysts, and it shows us a measure of trust because of, and all of this is because all of the above things stated. Now, again, back to data retrieval. And so the first part of data retrieval, as we said earlier, is to acquire the physical container of the data, and also to secure it in the state that you found it. So you must keep it without modifying it in any way. So, for instance, if you find a computer that's on in an office somewhere and this computer needs to be analyzed for whatever reason, you need to unplug it directly from the wall so that nothing happens if you click the off button on the computer or the off button on screen. And yeah, if you need to, and if it's a computer, or if it's like a laptop computer or something like that, you either plug it into a wall and leave it on the network, or if you really need to take it to your lab, you're going to use Faraday equipment and a charging block just to keep it in the same state and keep signals out away from it. And keeping signals away from it will ensure that it's in the same state and the logs are not changed as much as they would otherwise be from doing it any other way. And then in order to acquire a court-approved bitstream copy, we need to use a software like any of these, which are Balkasoft X, Celebrite, FDK Imager, or any other method that allows us a full file or allows us to make a full file copy of the media that we found. And also the original storage media, like we said, will be locked up under tight security to ensure that it's not modified on its own. And if you're able to do this on your own without any software, and you have a method of doing it without tampering with anything, you'll also be able to do it that way, just to make sure that it's court approved. And again, using these types of softwares, you can also analyze the bitstream copy once it's fully made and fully put on some sort of hard drive. And you could even do this by hand or with other software tools that are meant to parse out and analyze things like the registry or log files of a Windows system or anything like that. And again, I need to stress that ensure that the copy that you made is not modified. And this modification will lead to modification in the hash values, and these hash values not being correct will ensure that your data is not admissible in court and you're not able to do these things. And also, again, you're going to have to take notes on what you find so that they can be reported on later down in the process of your reporting. And so some key artifacts that we can find on a Windows system specifically are user files and folders, the system files and folders, which are located within things like program files x86, or even in some user directories as well. Swap files, which are files that hold extra data that is supposed to be in memory but is not in main memory. The print spooler, which is used to queue up printing documents. The recycle bin, which is a temporary place for storing deleted files. Link files, which are your links to executables that you may find on your desktop or anywhere else that's not necessarily the actual file location. And even emails that are stored in apps like the native Microsoft Mail app and many other things that you can find. Now, advanced analysis can take place in things like drive geometry, which is basically the shape of the drive or the shape of the stuff inside the drive, which is whether there be any deleted files or whether there be any partitions that have been modified, deleted, or otherwise not like you would expect them to be. And this can hide things in it that you may not have expected. Now, also file system types can have some sort of thing to them. So we can have different file types as well. So FAT32 or a 32-bit file allocation table scheme file system type can have very different properties from an NTFS or exFAT system. And we can see that in this table right here. So we can see that FAT32 systems can have much less data per partition and per file than all the other types of file systems. And also NTFS file systems can contain compressed files, or the files are compressed themselves and are encrypted and are journaled. As well, it performs very well on large drives. So that will be drives like your 1 terabyte or your 2 terabyte or maybe even more if you have a Windows system on that. So people in enterprises or businesses may want to use an NTFS file system rather than a FAT32 or exFAT file system because it has a lot of security technology and it is able to be journaled for faster file retrieval. And NTFS is in fact what Windows uses on its main partitions to store its operating system. And when it comes to reporting, again, this report is just a detailed report of what you found on a device and how it's related to the case goals. And it will show things like what evidence is presented on the device and what it shows to us based on what our goals were. And it is, at least in its document form, it's a hypertext document, which means that it can easily be linked to on a computer, and it also follows Daubert criteria. And these criteria are: 1, testability, whether or not the method that is used is falsifiable or capable of being objectively evaluated through experimentation or observation. So a very well documented process would definitely satisfy this Daubert criteria, while some other method that's new or very obscure may not be able to, or maybe weeded out by this Daubert criterion. Now, our second criterion in the Daubert criteria is the peer review and publication step. So there are a lot of extra points given, and it's most likely necessary for the thing or the set of steps that you're taking in order to do this. It is very important for them to be peer-reviewed or published in a reputable scientific journal. Now, peer review does indicate that the method has been scrutinized by others in the field, and these other people might be very prominent people in the field, so that's even better for our process. To have people with some weight behind their name say, yes, this process is good, and this is usable by every single person other in the field. And third is whether or not there's a known or potential error rate. So for the process, you need to find out whether there's a certain error rate associated with this method, and if it is acceptable within the field to have this much error. So because some processes have more error than others, we may find that some processes may not be admissible under these Daubert criteria because they violate this step of the Daubert criteria. As well, the standards and controls of this are that there must be some sort of standards and controls controlling the application of the technique, and these must be clear and consistent protocols that will reduce the likelihood of bias or misuse of the process that is being taken. And the last Daubert criteria is our criteria of general acceptance, and that will be answering the question, is the theory or technique widely accepted by the relevant scientific community? And this may not be a definitive factor, but broad acceptance can support reliability of the method. And if all of these criteria are present in the method that you're using, it is very much admissible in court, and also very much, or it very much stands the test of the forensic scientific process. Now, when it comes to legal proceedings, these Daubert standards serve as our gatekeepers for relevance and reliability of whatever, not only the process that we're doing, but ourselves, our testimony. So our testimony has to be based on sufficient facts and data, and the testimony also has to be the product of reliable principles and methods, which are deemed valuable and reliable by all of these 5 criteria. And at the end of it all, the expert has applied these principles. The expert, or us, or I, have applied these principles and methods reliably to the case at hand. And overall, all of this is just a broad overview of our reporting process. And in future videos, I'm going to talk more about hard drives and how we actually want to. Okay, if I go back here, I will talk more about some of these key artifacts in later videos, as well as how to analyze bitstream copies. And in the next few videos, I will also be talking about a little bit about, about up here, where is it? Okay, I'll be talking about this drive geometry part, the actual geometry of the drive, how the disks work, and at least right now, the way I'm thinking of it, at least the way that actual disk-based physical hard drives work on the physical level, as well as how files are stored in a system. So be ready for that. And with that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something out of this. And if you did, please hit the like button, comment, and also subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends to put out more good word for my videos. Now, thank you for watching, and if you guys are watching this at the time that it's released, it's around Christmas time. So I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, and for the next video, which will probably be released towards the 1st of 2025, Happy New Year before that one, if it's not released before the beginning of 2025, or if it's released after the beginning of 2025. And with all that said, Matt out.